Our next applicant is Judge Al Heavens. Good morning, Judge.
Good morning.
You can begin your remarks when you're ready.
Well, thank you. It's nice to see everyone. I'm Al Heavens, a District Court Judge from the 1st Judicial District in Northeast Iowa. I want to welcome the new members of the Commission and say welcome back to those of you who are returning. I must say thank you to everyone on the Commission who made me one of the 3 finalists for the last opening. That was a highlight of my professional career. And I learned not long after that that I made another top 3 list. I was talking to my kids on the way home from school, and I said, "What'd you do today?" And one of them said, "Well, today we had to tell the class 3 things we loved." And I said, "I love Mom, I love mac and cheese, and I love Dad." And I said, "Well, I'm glad to be on the list, but is it in that order? Is there anything I could do to move ahead of mac and cheese? Am I in a close third? Should we perhaps put your siblings on this list?" I get the impression that those are under advisement, so I have to play my cards right. So what I want to talk to you about this morning primarily is legal writing and the importance of doing justice at the Court of Appeals level through legal writing. But the last time I had talked about some important issues to me, like the court reporter shortage and the lack of attorneys in rural counties and the racial disparity issue in Iowa. And I understand the Court of Appeals doesn't play that administrative role in solving those problems, but I do think the Court of Appeals has a role to play. And that's when they see those issues come up, they can write about them in their opinions and make sure that people know these are not hypothetical issues or theoretical issues. These are issues that are really happening throughout the state of Iowa. For example, if a Court of Appeals case has a bad record because it was tape recorded as opposed to recorded by a court reporter, that could go in the opinion. If a criminal case was delayed for months or years because we were trying to find a court-appointed attorney but we couldn't, that could go in the opinion. And I know the racial disparity issue in Iowa can go in opinions because I just saw it in the last batch of opinions that the Court of Appeals issued. Less than 2 weeks ago, there was a case about whether the disparity between crack and powder cocaine sentencings has a rational basis to it. And both the majority and the dissent mentioned the dramatic negative impacts that's had on our African American community. So even if those issues aren't determinative of the case, you could put those in the opinion because 90% of cases that are appealed end at the Court of Appeals. So they can see these issues happening throughout the state, put that in the opinion, and that would perhaps help the Supreme Court and other decision makers when they're solving those. So those issues remain very important to me, even though I'm applying for a different job that has a slightly different role. Those remain things that I'm concerned about and that I think should be written about in opinions. And that leads me into my main topic about legal writing. Now, when I think about how does a judge on the Court of Appeals do justice? Well, ultimately what they're doing is deciding, was justice done at the lower level? Did the court follow the law at the lower level? But it's more than just determining whether the law was correctly followed. It's writing that and articulating in a way that everyone can understand. Not just everyone who's part of the legal community, but everyone in the state of Iowa. And you have my writing samples. You can draw your own conclusions about whether I do that when I write. But one thing that I'll point out about my writing samples is that I've chosen to footnote my citations. When I say citations, those are references to legal authority, cases, statutes. Most of the time when you read a legal opinion, you see these citations kind of littered throughout the opinion. And if you're someone who's outside the legal profession, that might as well be written in a different language to you. It almost is a different language because those citations don't mean anything to you and they make it distracting, harder to read, and to me it can be kind of intimidating to someone outside the legal profession who's reading these opinions and sees all this stuff that they don't understand in there. It may send the message that you're not welcome here. Don't try to read this, you won't understand it, it's not for you. And I think what judges should be doing is sending the exact opposite message. We've tried hard to make this clear and concise and in a way that you can understand it if you try to read through this. So I know that's not a majority position amongst appellate judges, or really any judge, to put all those citations down at the bottom. And I didn't always used to do that. If you look at some of my earlier work, I did it like everyone else and put them right up in the text. But I was convinced, because I always try to keep an open mind, I was convinced that you'll do justice better if you can make your opinion in any way easier to read for anyone who's going to read it. So that's why I changed my practice, and I keep doing that, even though most other judges do not. I would encourage other judges to try that and just see if you think that makes your opinion a little easier to read. So even though it's not the majority opinion, I think of a quote that I like from Martin Luther King Jr. that said, "The time is always right to do what is right." And I thought, that's the right thing to do, even though not everyone else is doing it. I'm going to do it because I think that's the best thing to do. That's the best way to deliver justice. So that's why I think I do that, and why I think legal writing is so important. So with that, I'd be happy to welcome any questions that you may have.
Thank you. We'll start the questioning with Commissioner Hoytink.
I do have a question, but you may have just become the most controversial candidate in all of judicial history, talking about footnotes and appeals. Speaking of appeals, it appears you've had roughly 3 appeals in your civil practice, and then criminal appeals handled in the by the Iowa Attorney General's office. So, what would you say to kind of being a little maybe light on your appellate practice? Have you dealt with appeals of administrative decisions? Have you had experience as in any capacity relating to appeals in your current role?
Well, in addition to the cases, I've argued one before the Supreme Court, I've argued before the Court of Appeals, I've briefed cases, and I'm a vociferous reader of all the appellate opinions that come out. The Court of Appeals does about every other Wednesday, the Supreme Court, when they're in term, every Friday, and I read all those, sometimes more than once, because I believe that makes me be a better judge when I understand what's going on, and sometimes I can see, another judge did this, I may have done this too had I not know about it. So I try to pay very close attention to what's going on the appellate level. As a district court judge, obviously I'm limited to just my courtroom in terms of what I can do now, so that part of my history is kind of closed off as opposed to more experience, but I try to follow things closely and keep track of what's going on, and I think that's probably the best thing that any judge can do, is read all those opinions very closely. So thank you.
Commissioner Chase.
Thank you for your application. What do you think is the importance of geographic diversity on the Court of Appeals?
I think it's very important because the law, again, is different in different areas of the state. I think we had a good conversation about how temporary custody hearings can be different throughout the state. So I think having that good perspective of different judicial districts, different urban and rural areas, I think is good, because they sit in panels of 3, and the more kind of diversity you have in terms of rural and urban and different judicial districts, the more likely that you may have a judge who spots, this is a little different in this area, or we do it differently, and could bring a good perspective to those appeals. So I would say we don't want to become the Iowa Court of Polk County. You want to be the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court, and draw judges from all around the state with many different perspectives.
Thank you.
Commissioner Pearson.
Thank you for your application and being with us today. I know in the past you've had some opportunities to do some pro bono work. Could you tell us about those, please?
Sure, and I feel there's a great sense of professional satisfaction doing pro bono work. When I was in private practice, a lot of times it would be clients who just needed something that they just couldn't afford. They needed help with a creditor. They needed to write a simple will. They had a divorce that wasn't very complicated, but they didn't have anyone to help them with. So I would always do that, wouldn't charge them anything. Now, obviously, I can't practice any law as a district court judge, so what I try to do is get out into my community, speak to students, speak to community groups, and listen to what they have to say, answer their questions. Again, that's been very fulfilling to hear from people and I plan to certainly keep doing that. I think that's a great thing that every person in the legal profession is encouraged to do, is get out there, meet with the community, help people, and that's been a great part of my career.
Thank you.
Commissioner Picklop?
No questions, thanks.
Commissioner Gray?
Just a short comment rather than a question. Judge, we talked last time as part of your Iowa Supreme Court, and you assured me that if you were on the Iowa Supreme Court, you would not move from Garnavillo because you couldn't. And you can tell us why, please.
Yeah, well, you know, where I'm from is a very important part of who I am. I live on the dairy farm. I'm very happy being there. And when we talk about geographical diversity, it kind of ruins it if everyone moves to Des Moines when they're appointed. So if I'm appointed to the Court of Appeals, I would plan on staying in Garnavillo and Clayton County on the farm with my wife and kids. And, you know, that's where I'm happy, and I think that helps make a better appellate court when you have people stay where they are, stay in their community, bring their unique perspective to the court. So it's not required to live in Des Moines. I wouldn't plan on that, and I think that's a benefit to have people from all around the state and perhaps a unique background. I thought maybe the most controversial thing I said the last time was bringing up calf placenta, but that's kind of part of my life. I see it every day. So I'm happy there. I love being there, and I plan to stay right there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think your wife would have something to say about that.
Yes, you'd be quite surprised.
Commissioner Hanson?
Thank you for your application. No questions today.
Commissioner Bevel?
Judge, you been on the district court as a judge, former county attorney, private practice. Does that, you think, enhance your ability to serve as a judge on the Court of Appeals?
I do think so. I've seen the law from a lot of different perspectives. You know, as county attorney, I don't think there's any other judges on the Court of Appeals who have been a county attorney or an elected county attorney, and I've also been in private practice. I think being a district court judge is probably one of the best ways to prepare to be an appellate court judge, because really what you're doing is looking what other judges have done and judging judges. And I think your opinions come with a little bit more weight to those other judges when you've actually done that job and been through it. And when you're in criminal cases, perhaps when you have to tell the state that they made a mistake, and this case is dismissed, that might come with a little more weight, being that I was a county attorney myself, and that I know that county attorneys make mistakes, and a lot of times the penalties are that dismissal with prejudice. So I think that wealth of different types of experiences I've had would be make me a good fit for the Court of Appeals and for judging other judges, and in criminal cases and the civil cases. I practice in many different areas of the law, so I'm kind of familiar with what it's like to go through many of these things. So I think those experiences would be very helpful.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hoig?
No questions.
Commissioner Henderson?
No questions, thank you.
Commissioner Stegner?
Yes, I'd like to talk about mac and cheese a little bit more.
Oh, no.
No, truly, I would. I really respect the humility of our branch, the honor that we have to champion clients in some of their darkest days. And one of the concerns I have is that we don't fill our court with prima donnas, with academics, with people who don't understand what it's like to sit next to a client on their darkest day. I'd like to have you talk to us about that value and how you bring that to the court.
Sure. Well, thank you. That's a great perspective, and I feel that way too. That real world experience. There's a lot of things that happen in a law office that don't happen in front of the court. You're oftentimes seeing people during a very challenging time in their life that you're trying to help them through and to give them good representation. And I remember that well when I was on the Court of Appeals. You've got a letter from some of my former clients that kind of they go through a difficult time. And that experience, being with them behind the scenes and in the courtroom, going through that very trying period, is something that you can't learn in a book. You can read about that, but having lived it gives you a different perspective, and it impresses upon me the importance of every single case that I decide at the district court level is so important to the people who are involved in it. It has this profound impact on their lives. And that's why I work so hard to try to get it right, because I know it's a difficult thing for people to go through, and I try my best to do it correctly as a judge, to get the law right, to explain it in a way that they'll understand. And I think that background that I have in representing people has helped me have that attitude that let's get it right and let's explain it in a clear way.
Thank you, Judge.
Thank you.
Commissioner Graber.
Good morning, Judge. Thank you for applying. Let's say that you make it through the commission and Governor Reynolds appoints you to become our next Court of Appeals judge. 5 years from now, people are talking about you. Tell us what they're saying.
Hope they're saying he started the trend toward everyone doing footnotes now. I hope they say that there is someone who has applied the law accurately, did it in an understandable way, has maybe shortened opinions, has been somehow innovative, whether it's footnotes, whether it's shorter opinions, that I've done something to help deliver justice throughout Iowa, and that at least every case I've been involved in, he does his best to be fair, to write it in a way that's understandable. So I'm hopeful that they say I've tried hard to do that and that I've had at least some success. Thank you.
Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you. Judge, in your last application in the interview process, you mentioned that in the context of being concerned about the racial disparity in incarceration rates in Iowa, and we are like one of the top 3 worst states in the U.S., that looking at the criminal history and putting less emphasis on that as a sentencing factor, you thought would make a difference, and you were trying to do that. Has there been any objective data as to whether that is making a difference, or if not any, scientific studies, can you say that you think it's making a difference?
Well, I can't say that I know of any specific data because it's kind of my idea. I, wish I could have taken that from somebody else, and there maybe is something else out there that I'm not aware of. But I will say that I can see in my courtroom that when you have attorneys on both sides, the prosecutor and the defense attorney, who I can tell have clearly thought about all those factors, and it's not necessarily giving less weight to the criminal history, but making sure you look at all those factors: age, employment circumstances, family circumstances, and not giving weight to only the criminal history or only the nature of the offense, because to me you don't see the big picture when you do that. And I think it would be, I hope there's something out there that is being worked on or that I could help on in terms of seeing the statistics of does that make a difference, because I certainly see it in my courtroom that it does when you look at the full picture as opposed to just some of those factors.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hartkoff.
Judge, thank you for being here. Appreciate that. When you were Clayton County Attorney, you wrote a monthly publication called Justice for All, and I enjoyed reading those writing samples that you provided. Can you talk about what drove you to write those each month, and then maybe the reaction in the community?
Sure. Well, one of the best things that ever happened to me when I ran for county attorney is I had an opponent. And that forced me to get out into the community and talk to people. And what I found by doing that is a lot of people had no idea what the county attorney's office does. And I thought, has anyone ever taken the effort to try to explain what they do? And there was no one doing that. So I went to all the local newspapers and said, if I came up with a column every month, would you print this? And they said, oh, sure, yeah, you'll be able to do that. They were a little skeptical of whether I could pump those things out every month, but I did, 98 months in a row. And they all printed them. The feedback from the community was all positive, just like I do now. I tried to keep them short, understandable, and pick a topic that was interesting that the community might like to read. And I would say it's one of the better things that I did as county attorney.
We have time for maybe one brief question. Commissioner Parrish?
I'm curious, Judge Evans, what did you learn about yourself and being on the court, going through this process and going before Governor Reynolds? And has it improved you in terms of the court, in terms of how you see yourself or the system in Iowa, the judicial system in Iowa?
Well, thank you for that question. I've had a great experience, even though it didn't end the way I'd hoped it ended last time. You know, what I learned about myself is that there's always a different perspective that I could be seeking out. Because one of the great things about this commission, 17 people, all from different backgrounds, not all lawyers practicing in the same area, and you all have a different take on the law, and my conversations with all of you have been wonderful. And to hear the questions that you ask and the angles that you take have definitely made me think about things that I would never have thought of that before, had I not had this half an hour, hour and a half conversation with some of you. That's been a great experience. It has definitely made me a better judge and a better person. So regardless of how it turns out this time, I'm happy that I did it. I think Iowa's got a great system, and I want to thank you all for serving on it and devoting your time to that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge, and we look forward to deliberating your application later this afternoon.
All right, thank you.